Hey guys, Jessica Henry here. I wanted to welcome you back today to my studio. I am going to be working on a fun little project here of this adorable little dachshund. Her name is Ella, and I have her picture here. I also, because this is almost a black and white picture, I have another photograph of the same dog with better coloring. So today I'm going to discuss working on commissions using multiple photo references, because sometimes you don't get an ideal photograph for a commission that somebody wants you to do. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Thanks for joining. I hope you enjoy it. All right, well, this is the palette that I will be using today. I don't use cobalt blue today, but that's pretty much what I'm using. And to start out with, I'm just going to use ultramarine blue and burnt sienna to map out where I'm going to put the dog on my canvas. I thin it down with some gamsol. And so all I'm going to use is the gamsol and some linseed oil today for my solvents and my medium. And so what I'm doing here is I'm making marks on my original image so that I can start to gauge exactly what I'm going to do. I work with the eyes first. I get one eye accurate, and then from there I measure out the other eye. I have a general idea of how big I'm going to put her on the canvas, and in fact, in this context here, I'm going to do her sight size. This little doggy's name is Ella, and I wanted to say thank you to Sherry Mack for letting me paint your beautiful dog. And anyway, I will get into her story in a little bit later here in this video. But for now, I'm going to talk about, again here what I'm doing. This method that I'm using to lay the dog on the canvas is called sight size. I'm going to make the dog on canvas exactly the same size as my photo reference. And so sometimes when you're doing a commission for someone, you're given a photograph and it may not be an ideal situation as far as the lighting or whatever goes. What you can do is to ask for a couple other photo references. They don't have to be great, but as long as you can maybe see the color or the bone structure or whatever, then, that's always best to do. And so that's what I have here. This photograph of Ella was absolutely adorable and just thoughtful and sensitive, but the color was sort of muted, so I had this other one here, and you can see it above the easel. Just taped it up there for reference, and I'll use that as I get closer to the color. So again, as you can see here, I'm just measuring, and I got the eyes in place. So I did the one eye, and I used that as reference. If that eye is whatever, about an inch long, and you can see I measure it with the end of my brush, then how many other eyes over is the other eye, and I'll measure that way, and I'll make just small marks. And so what I'm working on here is just getting that passage in there accurate with how the bone structure works itself around the eyes and getting the values. So now I'm taking the whole measurement of the eyes, seeing where are they exactly level with each other. They're not. The one on the far side is just a little bit higher than the other. You can see I'm working on that a little bit closer right here. And these things whenever you have faces, especially dogs, where they're kind of tipped a little bit, you really want to take the extra time and just measure and see how things align with each other. You can really get things off if those things are just slightly askew. And while it does help to know anatomy, you don't have to if you can just really focus on getting this drawing part in place. And I just draw with the brush and some gamsol. I find it easier to move things around than a pencil and an eraser. And I also don't get the intermingling of the graphite with my paints, which I know you can spray over your drawing, but I'd rather not introduce more chemicals into my painting. So I just start with the feeling of painting from the very beginning, and you can mass in shadows quickly, and you sort of, like a sculptor begins, blocking out clay. And that's what I'm doing here, is I'm blocking out that shape of that shadow. And so blocking in the shadows and the overall bone structure helps give me the likeness that I'm looking for. And so I'm sort of massing in those values as well. I'm getting that dividing line down the middle of the forehead in the right place. She has these wonderful little wrinkles up there. It just makes her look so thoughtful. So I'm also getting the values here too. You have to be very careful to make the values not too dark or too light, because you can get if they're too dark, it looks like it's deeper, and then you have a sort of a weird bone structure. And this same holds true with just doing regular portraits or anything. If you get that too dark, it has the illusion of it sinking in. So I'm also just going on my photograph and drawing vertical lines, and that's what I'm doing. Whatever I do on the original photograph, I'll do on the painting. So I'm seeing where different things fall in line with each other. And just coming up with those figures here. If the eye is this wide, how far down do certain wrinkles go and things like that. And if somebody gives you a photograph for a commission, you want to either make a copy of it or put it in a plastic sleeve, because, I mean, that's what I've found is just drawing these lines on the original image is very helpful to get that accurate. It's a little bit like doing a grid, but I don't know. When I would work at the atelier, we had a model before us. We were always taking the plumb line. So as far as I'm concerned, this is the same thing. You draw a vertical line on your image, and then you put it on your canvas, and you go from there. I forgot to mention, I am painting on an 11 by 14. It's a 1/2 inch piece of plywood, birch, and I've done a few coats of gesso, sanding in between each coat. And so you can see here, I'm measuring the width of the bridge of her nose by comparing it to her eye. So then on my painting, I go from the eye, how wide over is it? And you can see here, I will lock my pinky along the edge of the canvas like that, and then hold my brush still, and I can draw a vertical line straight down that way. So I'm matching the lines that I have put on my photograph, and I'm putting them on the canvas in relation to where they're supposed to go. You can see here now, I've zoomed in, and I'm painting on her nose. I'm just trying to get those angles accurate. Again, it's the same thing with the eyes. If these things do not line up, it's not going to read properly. So I'm taking a lot of extra time, and I did edit this video down so that it wasn't super long. But I thought that the idea is here. It should give you some ideas in painting your own portraits. And all these principles will work fine for whether you're painting a regular portrait or animal, whatever. The most important thing in painting a portrait is to capture not just the likeness, but the character of that individual. And I group animal portraits right in with human portraits because they're every bit as emotional and sensitive as any other portrait. So I got to know this doggie a little bit just through family and friends. This is a beautiful little doggie named Ella, and she has only just recently passed away. She was only 3.5 years old, and it's very sad. Anyway, I'll tell a little bit more about that story here as we go along. I just wanted to mention here too that I am drawing these lines straight down to get that curve of her lip just accurate, and looking to see where things fall in line under the eye, because I remember in my other videos too, that first thing that I put down and I work really hard at, I call that my truth. And so from that truth, I gauge everything else off of. And so I'm looking to see where different external lines intersect with what I have going on with her head, to see like where her ear on that side touches her eye passage in there. Also getting rid of some of the helper lines that I'm not going to need anymore. I call them helper lines. I suppose they're plumb lines. There's her ear. I see how far down does that little ear tip go. It's about there. So just cleaning things up as I go. And I just erase by dipping my brush in the gamsol, and then I kind of wipe it out with either a dry brush or a paper towel. So I'm getting the side of that ear over there. And you can kind of see what I'm working on from there. I don't want to lose sight of that middle little dip in her forehead. As I mentioned in the beginning, Ella was a dachshund, and very sweet, very, very sweet doggy. Dachshunds have, obviously because they have the longer back, they are very sensitive and prone to back problems. And they didn't know with her, she likes to run and jump and hop around and jumped off of furniture and all these different things. She was just so happy. And apparently what had happened was a disc had slipped, or more than one or whatever, and it had just progressively gotten worse. And they couldn't, it was just very sad, very tragic. So anyway, it's so sad to see and hear stories like that. So I'm very honored to be able to paint this little portrait of Ella. It's a little bit hard to get through this. She's so sweet. So I'm going to keep going talking about the painting here. So I'm just working on massing in some of the values as I see them around her face, and pulling in. As you can see, there's a highlight on the far ridge of her face, and that is only revealed by the darker tone that was behind it. And so I tried to put that in there. Thinking about her ears and the structure of the top of her head, which unfortunately was cut off by the photo, so I kind of had to make it up. And that's again where you really want to have those other photo references. In this video, I also share some pictures of Ella and her best buddy Riley and some of her friends. The thing about doing a portrait of anybody really is you're celebrating their life. And it's more than just a image captured on canvas of one being immortalized. It's so much more than that. You're celebrating and commemorating someone's existence here. And so I thought, if I'm going to do this, it'd be nice to honor her with a few lovely pictures in this video. So again, like I mentioned, I'm just looking to see where different lines of her anatomy connect with other lines of her that I already have down. The little ear flap, her collar, where it connects to her face. It's like I mentioned before, you don't have to be an expert on everyone's anatomy and bone structure, but if you just pick up these drawing tips on using helper lines and measuring, plumb lines, horizontal lines, whatever, and then see where things intersect, try to take it all in as a whole as you're working, you'll have a much better chance of getting an accurate picture than, if you pored over anatomy books and so forth, which I'm a strong advocate of knowing anatomy, but you shouldn't let it stand in the way of commencing forth painting pictures. So again, here I'm laying down just the value of her, and I did incorporate a little bit more of the burnt sienna because I'm kind of starting to think about the color that I want her body to be. I thought it'd be effective too to leave some of this painting just somewhat unfinished, kind of about her life and that story. Gotta stop. Hold on. Okay, I'm back. I knew this wouldn't be a very easy video to get through. Okay, so anyway, just working on getting these angles of her ear laid in, and again, the values. I couldn't see it because some of the ear was cut off, so I thought it was actually kind of effective just to let that far left side of her ear just sort of fade off. Excuse me. So I knew that I wanted the bottom of her nose to kind of come forward from the background, so I'm sort of mentally thinking about how I'm going to do that with the lit side of her muzzle down there I'll make the background back there a little darker. And on the shadowed side, I wanted a little bit, you'll see later, I add a little bit of a highlight back there just so it comes forward a little. So that's basically just all I'm kind of fiddling around with here is getting those passages. And then I clean my brush off and I kind of, in the gamsol, and I'm rubbing out passages where there's a little bit stronger highlight because I want to start thinking about sculptural. I start on a toned canvas. I forgot to mention this it's actually gessoed board. It is toned with just burnt sienna, yellow ochre, little ultramarine blue because I knew her coloring, and so I went with those colors to tone it. So my middle tones were already done, and it saves me time, and it's not as overwhelming as a blank white canvas. And then, of course, I begin with the drawing, getting that down, and at the same time as I do the drawing, I mass in the values because sometimes a drawing can look inaccurate if you don't get mass in a shadow. Sometimes when you get that value shadow masked in, then it starts to read more accurate. So I work at the same time with masking in values, sculpting out those shadows, as well as getting the drawing at the same time. So when I get those two things pretty much in sync where I want them, I will then pull out some highlights so I can really start to see where I'm going with the sculpture. Always thinking about the painting as a sculpture. So now I'm working on her eyes, and I'm just pulling in some more of those finer points. I know that I will go back through and add more detail even at this point in the painting, but you know, I want to get those areas feeling a little bit more finished as soon as possible. So I just erased a little highlight there, and on her nose too. I'm just thinking about the anatomy of her nose. And I do later on zoom in and focus on painting that better. Now I did take this painting to a little bit higher polish than most of my paintings. So if you like a looser brushwork, you know, it's obviously your prerogative. But with this doggy in particular, she has such a delicate little nature that I thought that pushing the painting to a little bit more higher polish, getting my little tiny brush out and just playing with some of that just seemed appropriate. So I'm trying to get the far side of that anatomy of her face over there more accurate as I saw it in the photograph. Pulling out those highlights, and again, it's a juggling act between drawing and capturing the accurate value. But as you know, with painting, you're driving a lot of different horses at the same time. So it's a numbers thing, and you just have to keep plowing forward as you figure out the reins of all these different horses. And there she is. Obviously, there's a lot to work on, but if you flick your eye back and forth, here's your assignment. Look at all the differences, and so that's where I go from this point. I look at everything, and I'll even take a photograph of it to see it smaller, and then you can see all the details condensed. So use your camera as a tool. I find it very helpful. Just take a picture, look at it on your phone, look at it small, and then I'll take and put the picture of the painting and the photograph side by side on my phone, and it helps to see the differences. And so I'm working on her collar, and there's the photo. So at this point now, I'm still going to refer to the original photograph, but in this case now, I'm going to be looking at her rich colors of her fur, and that is just burnt sienna, yellow ochre, to get that beautiful. So I start with the richest jeweled middle tone that I can find. I will move off into darks and neutrals later, but at this point, my key thing here is to get that rich color. And since I'm only using this little photograph as color reference, that's all I'm going to refer to there, is just capturing those color tones that I see, those color notes. So it's a little bit of a guessing game on the actual painting, but I'm looking at it to see where I would expect to see this color in reference to the lighting on the smaller photo reference. And so working on this passage around her eyes, getting the darks. Right now I'm really focusing on getting those darks as accurate as I can in color and value. They were this rich coffee tone, and so that's what I'm zeroing in on there. Keeping my brush very loose, I'm using, this is a size 4 flat. Sometimes I switch back and forth between a synthetic. This is actually a synthetic. I don't know if I said bristle. It's a synthetic. I like it for this because I can lay down a nice clean piece of color and it gives me enough spring. And I just think about little pieces of paint. To lay in the drawing, I used just a small size 2 round. I don't normally use rounds. It just happened to be what I grabbed. I have no aversion to rounds, I just prefer flats. I grew up using filberts, but filberts I grind to a cat's tongue point in no time at all, so I stick with filberts, or flats, sorry. So now I'm starting to lay down middle tone value ranges and thinking about, I've already been thinking about the anatomy in her chest and her muscles there, but especially as I start to go into the lighter tones, just playing with some of that region in there. And when I know I'm going to be painting animal fur, I know I'm going to be working on it in layers. So I start to lay down this more brighter yellow because I know it's going to be underneath a lighter tone. So at this point now, I'm getting into these middle tone ranges, some more neutral colors that may be a little bit more difficult to pick up. And they're really just, again, I could tell you what I'm using, but it's the same colors. Burnt sienna, yellow ochre, white, a little bit of cad yellow pale, but they're in varying degrees. And that's pretty much all I use in this entire painting, with the inclusion of ultramarine blue to help neutralize some of those more brilliant tones. And so there's a lot of little subtleties going on in here where her jawline connects with her neck. That's kind of that passage in there that I was working on, getting that feeling that her head is connected to her neck in there. And there's all these wonderful little, because of the teeth underneath their muzzle, it does all these interesting value changes in the muzzle. So those were things that I jump around a bit, so I was working on that in there. While I have different colors on my brush, I look at the entire scene and see all the different places that I can put that color. And so that's why I jump around. Especially when you're starting to lay down the color, you want to keep all of your values and what you're doing very simple and very clean. So I've got my medium tone that I started with, and then my darks, and then my lights. Dark, medium, and light. Looking to inside these shadow passages where there's bounced light, and that's what I saw coming on her eye socket there as it turned around to her forehead. Jumped ahead. And these are all actually in fast forward, just slightly fast forwarded. Some of them I do in high speed, but so I had mentioned getting the passage behind the head there to really make it look like her head was popped away from the background there. What I edit out of these videos is just Oh, there you go. Just that you can see it's pretty rough and there's a lot to work on. Oh, this is Ella in playing with her best buddy, Riley. All right, what I was about to say is what I edit out of these videos that you don't see, just like cleaning my brush off. I'm cleaning my brush all the time and dipping into the oil. I only use a teeny drop of linseed oil when I need it, just to help maybe stretch the paint if it gets too thick. And that's really the only reasons I would ever use medium, just to thin it a little bit. And I also edit out passages where it might get kind of dry or dull to watch, because you don't need to see every brush stroke that I lay down in these, because I'm trying to just convey a real simple idea here of just painting a dog portrait using different photo references. But again, if you're doing a commission for someone, it's best if you can get to know the animal, but sometimes the animal has passed on, or the person, and it's best to ask lots of questions and do everything you can. People love to talk about their pets, so if you can get someone to talk about their pet, that's going to really help to capture as much as you can, the personality of that little animal. Again, I wanted to thank Sherry Mack for letting me paint her little sweetheart here. And my heart goes out to you. All right, so I'm working on just some fine-tuning, these lighter passages up in there. Wanting to make it look like the bone structure of her head just turns and goes back into the shadow. Sometimes in a photograph, a photo reference, you're dealing with the camera actually flattens out an image, and so you have to go off of what you see, as well as, unfortunately, knowledge sometimes too. So knowing that her forehead turns and curls back, you just have to take that into account. Okay, so I'm working on the bridge of her nose, that passage there. I love that deer-like quality, especially that dachshunds have. Such a sweet little dog, these dachshunds. I didn't know how sweet they were before my sister and Sherry's little dogs here. Yep, definitely love them. All right, so I'm thinking too about the anatomy of the nose there, and using a cooler blue tone as I'm painting in the... I don't use black to get this dark black color. It's just ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, but more on the blue side. It'll give you a nice rich black. And so I'm looking at all of these little angles and the subtleties in the nose. And around the eye. You can see too, in the process of painting, it's just little pieces of paint. Put one down, stop. Put one down, stop. You don't want to do 47 little fuzzy little... It's better to just lay it down and look at it. The same adage, measure twice, cut once. It's the same thing. You'll get done faster with your painting if you just actually go slower. Take your time and way into... And remember, this is fast forwarded too, so I'm going actually much slower. All right, and as you can see, I jump around, and I do that on purpose to try to create an overall sense of unity, working the whole painting at the same time as a whole. And so just tightening up some of this anatomical features in here, and just getting some of those a little bit more accurate. I mean, although we try to capture the anatomy accurate, like I mentioned before, it's most important to capture the heart and soul of the individual in painting a portrait. So how do you do that? Well, if your anatomy and if your drawing is off, unfortunately is going to be distracting. So try really hard to get that accurate by measuring and so forth. But, taking the time, looking at your image to say, okay, what exactly is it about this image that helps me understand who this individual was or is. Sometimes it's the tilt of a head, the twinkle in the eye. If it's a portrait, maybe the angle of the mouth or something like that. I try to avoid using objects in a painting to help convey who someone was. It can get sort of contrived. If you can do more with the brush, then that's even better. So now I have my tiny brush out, and this is in super fast speed. No, actually this isn't in hyperdrive yet. Just mildly fast forwarded. Pulling out some more of that anatomical information on that side. Working on the eye. You don't want to get the highlights too bright. Just keep it a little bit. And in any kind of portrait, you want to pick a dominant eye. And of course, in this case, it's the one that's closer to us. So I'm just cleaning up these passages. And that, again, is my dark blackish mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Cleaning up that, I had that highlight too big, which made her look like she had cataracts, so you have to kind of scale it back and make sure that they don't get too big. And then, well, you'll see, I put in her eyelashes to make it really look like there's a lid over the eyeball. So I don't normally paint with brushes this small, but again, like I mentioned, I really felt that doing this portrait of Ella, seemed appropriate to just focus on getting it more delicate. Sometimes, when I've painted little boy dogs or whatever, it just seems appropriate to have a looser, more rougher texture. It kind of lends that feeling of a rough and ready little boy, but she was such a dainty little girl that I just think it called for a smaller brush, more detail. But if you like doing the looser, rougher, stop the video. You're done. So anyway, this is in the very fast forward now. And you can kind of see how things kind of just get tightened up. And I smooth out some of my brush strokes without losing the integrity of the value or the bone structure underneath. I just take in over the top, add a little bit more fur and texture to that. So I wanted to slow down a little bit and work on her nose so you could see sort of where I go with that. Again, this is my black mixture. And I'm looking at the original photo and just deciding where these different layers are. And you can see that there's the bounced light hitting the bottom of the nose is one tone, and it has a warmer tone because it's picking up the fur. But the highlight here that I'm working on is picking up the sky. So it's a bluer tone underneath, and it's a softer highlight. And then over the top of that blue tone, I pop in just some white little dots to really show the wet nose. And so that's where I'm going with that nose anatomy. Black underneath, or that blackish tone. Blue-gray highlight if it's reflecting the sky. And then the white little sparkles. But the bounce light underneath is a warm tone because it's picking up the fur. So you always want to think about what colors are actually affecting highlights and reflected lights. So I'm on hyperdrive here. Had too much coffee that day. Just kidding. As you can see, I'm working on the collar. There was a silver ring on the collar, but I didn't think it was necessary. You always have to decide, is this thing going to help tell the story? No. Or yes, you need it, or whatever. But so as I mentioned before, I was working on the layering of the fur. I did that more golden tone underneath, and then I popped in just some brighter lights and hair, doing some more flipping down there. I didn't need the eye to go down to the passage of her chest, so I did keep the brushwork there a little bit more loose, keeping the eye focused on her face. This is Ella when she was a baby, playing with my niece, Emma. And so here I'm taking that passage behind the nose, and I'm just highlighting a little of her fur back there so that her nose pops forward from that background. Getting in some whiskers, and I'm using another paintbrush as a maul stick. It just helps so I can get in there and get some of those things, soften up those brush strokes. The trick about doing those tiny little details is you don't breathe. Just don't breathe. And I thought, well, since she is mostly, I have these golden tones, I like to use complements in the background. And so I'm starting to lay in sort of a darker passage there and back there so that it helps draw the eye, keep the eye focused in the area around her face. And that's just ultramarine blue, yellow ochre. I think I added some phthalo green to that later just to help pull in a little bit more of that cooler tone and interest. I keep the background sort of abstract, non-objective, maybe suggesting sky and trees. Yeah. So that's what I'm working on here. And I wanted it more sky behind her head because I didn't want the eye going back there. The eye is always drawn to the area of the greatest contrast, and if I had done dark behind her head, it would have drawn us off the canvas. And so that's where my thoughts are with this background back there. I wanted it to reflect some of the sky, but I didn't need to draw the eye off the canvas, so it's just sort of supporting it. And just tying in a little bit of that down there. I had it darker, but I kind of lightened it a little because it was really contrasting and didn't need to draw the eye to that corner either. So then I will take a little bit of turpentine or gamsol and just sort of splash and dribble. This is her best buddy, Riley, Ella's buddy. And this is Riley when he was little. These are lovely dachshunds. Oh my goodness. Miniature dachshunds. So I'm taking some gamsol on my brush and just tapping it off. All right, so here's the finished painting of Ella. And here's some good news right here. Meet Gracie Lou, Sherry's new little dachshund. Very exciting. All right, well, that wraps it up. I wanted to thank you guys so much for joining me. I had a great time painting Ella, and if you liked it, go ahead and like and subscribe if you liked what you saw. All right, thanks so much, guys. Bye-bye.